So it is coming up to 15 years. So it'll be 15 years this Sunday since I gave up alcohol at a temple here in Thailand called Wat Thamkrabok. And so in this video, I just thought that I'd explain, what led me to that temple, what happened while I was there, and why it worked after so many other things I tried in the past hadn't worked. And by not work, because people would say, well, you'd stopped in the past. I did stop in the past. One time I stopped up to 2 years. What I mean by worked is that it's what allowed me to finally end my addiction. Anytime I'd stopped before, there was always this sense, this fear that I was just going to go back to drinking again, and it was almost like I'd stopped drinking, but the drinking never went away. It was always hanging over me, and it was just always this sense, this fear of just having a reprieve, and that things were going to get shit again. But when I left Thamkrabok, it was over. I knew it was over, and so it was very, very different, and that's what I mean by it worked for me, because it gave me what I was after. I wasn't after a break from alcohol of a few months or a few years. I wanted it to be over, and that's what happened. So I'd like to sort of begin then, explaining how I ended up there. I'd been struggling with an alcohol problem since my late teens, probably earlier, but it became such an issue that I had to go to rehab at about the age of 20. And I tried many things. I ended up in another rehab when I was 25. I stayed there for a year in a dry house. Loads of counselling, joined recovery groups, read all the books, looked at the research. And I felt that I'd done everything. And then, a few years before I went to Thamkrabok, I moved to Thailand in 2002. And my main reason for coming here was one of two things. Either I was going to end my addiction problem by becoming a monk, or I was going to drink myself to death. And I was yo-yoing between those two. And it's not necessarily that I wanted to drink myself to death. It just felt that if I wasn't able to stop, that would be the only option. That would be what was going to happen, basically. It wasn't that I wanted it to happen. And it turned out neither of those things happened. But so I came here, and what I would do is I would drink really heavily and get really involved in the whole drinking scene here. And then I would reach a point where I would stop and I'd go to a temple and I'd go on a meditation retreat. And a few years before I went to Thamkrabok, there was a temple called Wat Thamkrabok, where I had a particularly fruitful meditation retreat. It was a 26-day retreat. And what it involved was, it started off, and I went there basically in alcohol withdrawals. And what it involved was starting off meditating 8 or 9 hours a day and then building up until the last 3 days of the 26 days was non-stop meditation. It's called determination. And what happened was I encountered this incredible mental freedom. Something I got a glimpse of before, but never, I'd experienced something. It had this really significant spiritual experience in my mid-20s on a double-decker bus in London, basically where everything fell away, and I just felt one with everything. There was no Paul, there was just life. But that just came. I have no idea, why that happened. I wasn't doing anything to make that happen. It just seemed to appear out of nowhere. But this time at the temple, there was this other experience of complete freedom. But there seemed to be a process that led to it. It didn't seem to be just random. And that was that sort of was very different, because it was something that I felt I'd be able to get back to. And indeed, I felt that it was, the solution to all my problems. But unfortunately, what happened, as soon as I left that temple, I just drank again. And for the next few years, I would yo-yo between drinking all the time, getting so sick that I would stop and then doing another retreat. And I was really confused by this. I thought once I tasted this freedom, that would be the end of the game. That would be, because that's what I thought it was the only thing I needed. But it turns out the reality is that tasting freedom isn't the same as being free. They're not the same thing. And in fact, tasting freedom, it's very, very encouraging. And it was very important because I could see there was something much better available than the oblivion I got from alcohol. But it also made the kind of, that when I was drinking so much worse, it made that state so much worse because it really started to feel like I was in hell. And so I did this thing, ping-ponging between meditation retreats where I get back into that state or similar, and then going straight back to hell again. And that continued for a few years until I eventually hit Wat Thamkrabok, the temple where I finally stopped. And by the time, in the weeks before I went to Thamkrabok, I was pretty hopeless. I just discovered the internet back then. So it was 2006, and it's the first time I ever had my own computer with the internet, and it was in rural Thailand, so it was a really, really poor connection. But I'd spend a lot of my time just looking for solutions and contacting people. And what I was hearing was making me very, very despondent, because I'd figured out that the things that I tried in the past weren't going to work for me. But when I contacted people, they would say, well, I felt there was almost a victim blaming going on. That the problem was that I wasn't ready to accept those solutions, so that meant that I wasn't ready to stop. And often the advice that I get was, well, basically you need to keep on drinking until you're ready. And that was not a good thing to be, that wasn't something that was helpful to me, because I could see that I wasn't going to last much longer. I'd already told my liver being damaged, and I felt absolutely desperate to stop. I just needed a different path, a different way of going about it. But there seemed to be, the only solutions seemed to be things that I'd already tried and hadn't worked out for me. In that they didn't give me what I was actually looking for. And that was when I came across Thamkrabok. And as soon as I kind of heard about it, and it's really strange how I'd never heard about it before, because I'd already been living in Thailand quite a long time, but I'd already been living there a few years. I'd already been to a few temples, so but somehow it wasn't on my radar. But I kind of came across a website, and they, I contacted them, or my wife contacted them, and they said I could go. And everything changed from there. When I arrived at the temple, it took me a couple of days to get there. I had a couple of days on my motorbike riding around Thailand. I had to sort out a new visa, which meant crossing into Myanmar and coming back, and then driving down to the temple, which is quite far away. And I did it all in this Honda Wave, which is what I drove, which was the only transport I had at the time. And I finally got there, and what I heard right away, there was a monk called Prahans, and he kind of sat me down and we had a talk, and he explained his, the temple's kind of, or his view of addiction, which was basically very, very simple. There was no discussion about disease or anything like that. The discussion was more about, that we lose our way, and because we lose our way, we look for things to make us feel better. And the losing our way is this basically trying to avoid our life, trying to escape our life. And because we're trying to escape our life, we start to feel uncomfortable, and then we do things to make ourselves feel comfortable, and those things actually make things so much worse. And that's the basic problem. And that idea really resonated with me, because I could see that was the same conclusions I was coming to in meditation. I could see that. I could see, that was the one thing I saw in meditation, that you sit there, and it's when you reach a stage where you can't avoid just being there. And every time you kind of try to escape being there, the mind just goes into this kind of hell state. Especially if you're sitting there for hours and hours and hours of meditation, the mind will try every trick in the book to get away. It will start fantasizing, it will start planning, it will do all of this stuff, but none of it actually works. And you're eventually left with just, there is no escape. And when you acknowledge that there is no escape, for that moment you're free, and it's this incredible peace and stillness. And I could see that. I could see that the problem was that that's what I was doing. I kept on trying to escape, and it never, ever, ever worked. And so that was kind of good to hear. And I also, a big part of the process at the temple was a thing called a Sacha, the vow you make. And I made a vow never to drink alcohol again. Now the Sacha is, it could be translated as honesty. I like to think of it as trust, as trusting life. So it's this commitment to stop avoiding life, to stop trying to escape life, to stop. And craving is this attempt to escape what's happening. That's what it always is, this rejection of what's happening. So it's this commitment to stop rejecting what's happening. That's what I committed to. And alcohol was just one of the ways that I avoided being what was here. It was one of my favourite ways of escape. And I found there was lots of other ways. And I'd already, by the time I got to Thamkrabok, I'd already recognised that's what my problem was, this trying to escape. Life would make me feel uncomfortable. I would look for some means of escape. The means of escape wouldn't work, so I'd start doubling down on it to try to make it work. And then eventually everything would go out of control and I'd feel completely overwhelmed. And that process happened in many different areas, most notably with alcohol. It was just this, as soon as I started trying to escape, it kind of was like a domino effect, until eventually I reached this state where everything seemed completely out of control and I felt completely overwhelmed, and it was horrible. And actually, during those previous years of quitting alcohol, the reason that the fear was about that, happening again. And because I didn't understand how it happened, I was always afraid of it happening again. See, when you don't know, like that sense of being completely out of control, that sense of completely being caught in a downward spiral, when that appears to happen out of nowhere, and the possibility that it could happen out of nowhere, that's incredibly scary. But what started to happen is I started to see very clearly why that happened and how it happened. And so being kind of given that theory by Prahans just fit in really well with where I was at. So that was very important. The temple itself, the routine there was very, very simple. There was no groups, no therapy sessions. We did a few meditation classes with Prahans, but most of it was, there was a lot of cleaning the temple and brushing the temple. A lot of time just sitting, talking to each other. And the most popular thing about the temple that people kind of talk about a lot is the vomiting. So as part of, I hope you're not squeamish, but as part of the treatment at Thamkrabok, for the first few days you take this specially created medicine that comes from the jungle. It's made out of these hundreds of different herbs. And when you swallow this stuff, it goes into your stomach, and right away your body tells you this does not belong there. And you have to get it out. And so you start drinking loads and loads of water, and you start vomiting and vomiting and vomiting and vomiting it up. While this doesn't happen by yourself, this happens in a huge crowd. So you're basically kneeling in front of a gutter, drinking water and vomiting it back up, while everyone is singing and clapping. It's the most bizarre thing ever. And when people hear about it, just think it's crazy. How could that actually be helpful? but I found it incredibly helpful for a number of reasons. I mean, one thing in it, I mean, as a way of looking at it, and the way I was looking at it, it did feel like a kind of purging of that old me, of that old, my old way of doing business, my old way of relating life. But I suppose even more importantly, it was this great humility that came with it. You know, the mind is very, very good at rationalizing things and justifying things. But ending up in a temple in a jungle in Thailand, vomiting while people are clapping, you know that something significant has happened to get me here. That, you know, there's no mistake. You know, that if for me to end up in this position, I've obviously been very, very, very off course. And I genuinely felt humbled in a very wonderful way, actually. And I felt there's something very emotional about those ceremonies and after them, and this sense of closeness and this sense of, you know, when you're vomiting beside somebody, it allows a sense of closeness that probably might not otherwise be available, because you're completely naked and completely vulnerable. So I mean, I found the whole thing helpful. A lot of people said that, you know, one of the reasons why they did it is it's meant to speed up withdrawal symptoms. I mean, it certainly seemed to be that way for me, and other people, like, they claimed the same things. People coming off heroin and stuff, that they felt was very helpful. So that was that. I only stayed at the temple for 10 days, and it turned out that's all I needed. That's all I'd actually planned to stay. It's all I could stay. But on the day before I left, I hit this wall. I was suddenly full of doubt again. And what it was I'd been there before, in the sense that I'd really got my hopes up, that I'd really felt that things were going to change, and then there was the crushing disappointment of ending back where I was. And there was no real, I could see, it just seemed that, you know, well, this is just going to happen again. I mean, maybe I'll get a few months, maybe even a few years, but I'll just end up back spiraling out of control again. It's only a matter of time. That's kind of what I've been told. I mean, I've been told that the nature of addiction is relapse. And I just felt really, really despondent. And I felt I'd kind of been made a fool of as well, in the sense that getting my hopes up again. That I kept on getting my hopes up. I kept on putting myself in a position where I got my hopes up, only to be disappointed and to have my things dashed. But then I kind of realised something. I realised for the first time that there was no escape. And I knew that message had really hit. And this is why. So why did Thamkrabok work when other things didn't? Well, first of all, I don't just think it was Thamkrabok. I think it was a number of things. It was a journey. But I'd finally reached a point where I could see that the only problem really was that, you know, it always started from me trying to avoid what was happening. That I'd feel uncomfortable, and that would, like, spiral from there. I would do something to not feel the discomfort. I would try to escape it. I would try to avoid it, and that would lead to something else and something else, until eventually it was all gone. It was all out of control. And I could see that doing that had never ever worked. That drinking had never actually worked. And from that deep realization and that sense of being completely broken by that process, that I could see there was no need for me to ever do that again. And it was this absolute certainty that I would never drink again. I felt absolutely sure of that. So, and it was this huge sense of relief. and real gratitude for the journey that brought me to that, because I could see that it wasn't just about alcohol. Alcohol was just a symptom. I was doing this in so many different ways, and I could see that what not doing that led to this complete opposite thing that was so wonderful, that when I didn't try to escape life, when I just trusted life. Because that's what I've been told as well. When you take the Sacha vow, I mean, the promise is that if you stop avoiding life, your life will get better. And I knew that beyond any doubt. I could see that beyond any doubt. And so that was the end of that. Also, what was very important to me. Now I know this is not going to be the same for everybody. I found the idea of identifying as an alcoholic as actually unhelpful, and seeing myself in those terms. And one of the things I'd noticed in meditation that these kind of labels that we put on ourselves can be harmful. And I could see that was one of the reasons why I never felt free. That I bought into this idea that I'm an alcoholic, and so I'll always be an alcoholic. And so I had to let that idea go. And the amazing thing is that when I did, all the problems that were created by that identity fell away as well. I'm not anyway saying this to say, people shouldn't call themselves recovering alcoholics. People can call themselves whatever they want to. I'm just kind of saying, from my journey, for what worked for me. But, I found that particular thing to be ultimately unhelpful. And that's why I say, I didn't just give up alcohol, I gave up being an alcoholic. So that's a bit about what happened to me and why it worked. Since then, it's been beyond anything I could have imagined. It's been so much better than anything I could have imagined. That even, my ideas of peace were very impoverished. They were very, because it just deepens and deepens and deepens and deepens. I was saying to somebody earlier, I was looking back at some of my old blog posts, and they often sound very, very naive. And it's not that, necessarily what I've written is wrong. It's just that I can kind of see that you didn't really get the depthness of what you were saying. And we can be and I think that's part of the problem with addiction. We just become so satisfied with so little. But in the years since then, this has deepened into something incredibly wonderful. And Thamkrabok was a huge part of that, and I'm very, very grateful to the monks there and the people there. Same, Wat Thamkrabok was very much a part of that. In fact, everything that happened, all the other stuff that happened, was part of that journey. So even though stuff, like I don't follow the 12 steps, but that was part of my journey as well. It was all part of the journey. And I'm very grateful to the journey. So, and long may it continue. So thanks very much for watching. If you would like to do some coaching with me, please contact me, and we can set that up. And please consider subscribing to the channel on YouTube, or to giving an like or leave a comment. If there's any questions you have, please feel free to send them to me. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again.